Perrin should have been worrying about her future as she stood at the edge of the Alpha King's grand hall, watching the celebration unfold in a blur of firelight and music. After tonight, once her youngest sister completed the mating bond, she would have no purpose left. 6 sisters guided into advantageous matches, and now what? But all she could think about was the child. A little boy, perhaps 5 years old, huddled in the corner with his knees drawn up to his chest. He wasn't throwing a tantrum or wailing loudly, just sitting utterly still, occasional silent tears tracking down his pale cheeks. "Perhaps he's ill," a noblewoman suggested, eyeing the pale boy. "Or possessed," her companion muttered. Something painful twisted in Perrin's chest. 18 years ago she had felt life quicken in her womb, had imagined holding her own son or daughter, soothing their tears, guiding their steps. All those dreams had died along with the child she'd carried for only 5 precious months. She would never be a mother. And now, seeing this small boy suffering, without one by his side. Perrin dug her nails into her palm and called to a passing maid. "Excuse me," she asked. "Could you please attend to that child? He seems distressed." But when the maid glanced in the direction Perrin indicated, her expression shifted from polite deference to tense wariness. "My lady, don't look at that one in the eye," she whispered urgently. "I beg your pardon?" Perrin blinked in confusion. The maid leaned closer. "Don't you know what that is?" she hissed. "It's a child," Perrin said. "A vampire child," the maid said. "One of Lord Drystan's brood." Perrin looked back at the boy with new understanding. She'd heard the vampires would be attending tonight, Lord Drystan particularly, a distant relative of the Alpha King. The ladies of the court had whispered about little else all evening. "They say he's the most beautiful creature ever to walk the earth," one had sighed behind her fan. "And the most dangerous," another had added. "One bite and you're addicted forever." Looking at the small figure in the alcove, Perrin found it hard to conjure any fear. "He's just a little boy," she said firmly, giving the maid a reproachful look. The woman's face hardened. "He could be 100 years old for all we know. They don't age." "A 100-year-old unable to stop crying while clutching a toy?" Perrin asked skeptically. The maid shrugged. "Plenty of nannies and maids have tried tending to it already. The child just won't stop crying." Her tone carried a dismissive edge that ignited something protective in Perrin's chest. "Perhaps he needs kindness, not service," she said coldly. The maid retreated, leaving Perrin alone with her indignation. She dug her nails deeper into her palms, feeling the sharp sting as skin broke. She tried to look away from the child, to focus on her sister's ceremony, but her gaze kept returning to the alcove. The boy had grown quieter, his small body curled tighter, as though trying to disappear entirely. Before she could question herself, Perrin crossed the floor and knelt beside the alcove. "Hello," she said gently. The child's head jerked up, eyes wide with alarm. Up close, his beauty was startling. Skin like fresh snow, dark curls falling across his forehead, and eyes an impossible blue. "I'm Perrin," she continued, keeping her voice soft. "What's your name?" For a long moment he said nothing, just tensed, pressing himself further into the corner. Then, "Finley," he murmured. "It's nice to meet you, Finley," Perrin smiled. "How old are you?" 5, he whispered, the word catching on a suppressed sob. The stunned surprise in his expression broke her heart. How long had it been since someone had simply spoken to him? Treated him like a child rather than a creature to be feared. Perrin reached toward him, offering comfort, when she noticed his gaze drop to her palm. Blood still beaded in the small crescent wounds where her nails had dug too deep. The boy's eyes widened, pupils dilating slightly as he stared at the crimson drops. Understanding dawned. "Are you hungry, Finley?" Perrin asked gently. He shook his head fiercely, still facing away from her. The gesture touched something maternal in Perrin's soul. Even starving, the child was trying to resist his nature. "It's okay," she said, extending her bloodied palm toward him. "My wound is closing right now anyway. Shifters heal quickly." Finley glanced back, conflict evident in his eyes. "I'm offering," Perrin said. After another moment's hesitation, the child inched closer. Perrin remained perfectly still as he took her hand in his small, cool fingers and brought it to his lips. Finley's entire body relaxed as he licked, the tension melting from his small shoulders. Perrin's free hand moved to stroke his dark curls, her eyes filling with unexpected tears. In this strange moment, she felt like a mother for the first time in 18 years. But then, near them, came a voice. "What have you done?" it said. It was soft as winter wind, yet somehow filling the alcove completely. The sound of it froze them both. Perrin looked up to see a man, with golden curls framing features so perfect they seemed sculpted rather than born, stare at her hand with absolute horror. A vampire, unmistakably, and from the way Finley tensed against her side, someone the child knew well. "What have you done?" the man repeated, his melodic voice shaking. Perrin instinctively tightened her arm around Finley. He was hungry, and she attempted. "You let him feed from you." The vampire's gaze dropped to Finley's small face, still pressed against her hand. "He was starving," Perrin said, defensive now. "He's just a child." "He's a vampire," the man interrupted, his voice low and urgent. He moved closer, not threatening, but concerned, his eyes never leaving Finley. "And you've just condemned him to something far worse than hunger," he murmured. Chapter 1. An hour later, a servant led Perrin away from the revelry of the mating ceremony into a quieter wing. The sounds of celebration faded until only the echo of her heartbeat remained. They reached an ornately carved door guarded by two figures wearing the insignia of the Northern Territories. "Lord Drystan awaits you, my lady," the servant murmured. The private chamber beyond was bathed in shadow and firelight, a sitting room appointed with dark wood furniture. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she heard as she entered. Perrin startled. She hadn't heard Lord Drystan move at all. Up close, his beauty was almost painful to behold, golden curls framing a face that belonged in cathedral paintings. But beauty wasn't the right word for features so perfect they seemed carved rather than born. "Please sit," he said, and something in that voice beckoned. "Is Finley all right?" she asked, remembering why she was here. "He's sleeping now," the Lord said, taking the chair opposite her. "I thought vampires didn't sleep," Perrin said. "Eventually, we don't," he acknowledged. "But Finley was only turned 6 months ago. He still retains some human habits, sleep among them." 6 months, Perrin echoed. "So he really is 5 years old then? Not older?" "Yes, he is in every meaningful way still a child." A shadow passed across Lord Drystan's features. "That's the tragedy of child vampires," he murmured. "They're trapped forever in bodies that will never grow." His voice caressed each word with such melancholy that Perrin had to resist the urge to reach across and touch his hand in comfort. "And you found him?" she asked instead. "I try to find them all now," he said simply. "The children." "Why?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its propriety. "Because without guidance, newly turned vampire children are a danger to others and to themselves. I try to give them a chance at some version of life, providing sanctuary, teaching them to drink animal blood." His gaze never left her face as he spoke. The intensity of his attention was both thrilling and unnerving. "Which brings me to our current situation." Something changed in his expression, a predatory stillness that reminded her what he truly was beneath the beauty. "May I ask who you are, that you thought it wise to feed a vampire child without permission?" Perrin bristled. How could anyone deny a child in distress? "I'm Lady Layla's sister," she replied, "and her chaperone. A position that ends with tonight's ceremony, I presume." "You presume right, my lord," she admitted. "Forgive me," he said. "I didn't mean to imply. It's only relevant to what I must discuss with you." "Which is," she managed. "The blood you gave Finley." His voice dropped lower. "I'm afraid you've placed yourself, and him, in a delicate position." Perrin frowned. "It was only a small taste. Surely it can't harm him." "You don't understand what blood does to a newly turned vampire." Lord Drystan rose in one fluid motion. Finley was already struggling more than the others with the animal blood diet. Now that he's tasted human blood, I'm afraid he'll develop a craving for it. For yours specifically. A chill settled in Perrin's stomach. "What does that mean?" "He'll likely begin to crave only your blood," the vampire lord said, Nothing else will satisfy him. Not animal blood, not even other human blood. Only yours. From just one taste? Perrin asked, alarmed. He moved closer, each step as graceful as a stalking panther, until he stood before her chair. Looking up at him, Perrin felt small, vulnerable, yet strangely exhilarated. From just one taste, yes, he confirmed. If that happens, and he cannot feed from you again, he'll waste away. You mean he'll die? Perrin whispered. Yes, and it will be excruciating. The weight of what she'd done pressed against Perrin's chest. That sweet child suffering because of her thoughtless kindness. Then I'll let him feed from me again, she said firmly, rising to her feet. For a moment, Lord Drystan's perfect composure slipped. Something flickered across his features, admiration, perhaps even respect. Then his expression darkened, concern replacing surprise. A noble impulse, but dangerous, he said. He wouldn't be able to control himself. He'd take too much, too quickly. He could kill you without meaning to. I could fight him off, Perrin insisted. I'm a shifter. We're stronger than vampires. You wouldn't want to, he countered simply, and the softness in his voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. I can't just let him suffer, she said, frustration edging her voice. There must be something we can do. Lord Drystan was silent for a long moment. The firelight danced across his features. There is a solution, he said eventually, though it's not without complications. Tell me, Perrin urged. A blood bond, he said carefully, but not with Finley. With me. Perrin's heart skipped a beat. With you? When a vampire forms a blood bond with a mortal, that mortal becomes undesirable to other vampires. Their blood no longer appeals. If you formed a blood bond with me, Finley would no longer crave your blood. The bond acts as a natural deterrent. I would perform a ritual, a single feeding that establishes the bond. After that, he hesitated. You would need to come north with me, to my estate beyond the frost line. I would need to feed from you occasionally to maintain the bond, but minimally. You would drink my blood, Perrin said bluntly. Yes, but I have excellent control. You would be in no danger from me. Perrin turned away. I also need a nanny for my children, Lord Drystan added. I have 4 in total, including Finley. Bonded to me, you would be protected from them. They wouldn't crave your blood. He turned toward the window. You're a shifter, another supernatural being who could match their speed and senses. They see so few people apart from me. It would be good for them to have someone else. He glanced back at her. I would compensate you generously, of course. Perrin stepped away, needing distance to think. What you're suggesting is that I leave my home, form a blood bond with you, essentially becoming your food source, and care for your vampire children. This would merely be a solution to protect Finley, Lord Drystan admitted. The bond is not ownership. It's protection, primarily, and the feeding would be minimal. But perhaps you have children of your own waiting at home, he asked when she didn't reply. A mate? The question pierced her heart. No, she said. I can't bear children. Heat rushed to her face at the admission. Why had she told him that? But then, she met his eyes once more, and for the first time, true emotion crossed his perfect features. Well, he murmured, his voice quiet. I have enough for both of us. The unexpected gentleness made her throat tighten. Perrin looked out at the night sky, weighing her options. To stay here, returning to an empty life without purpose, or to go north with this strange, beautiful creature and be needed again. When would we leave? She asked. Lord Drystan's perfect features registered subtle surprise. Then he bowed, a gesture both courtly and ancient, and Perrin felt herself falling into a story much older and darker than she had ever imagined. Chapter 2. The journey north took 3 days. As they traveled, the landscape transformed, lush forests giving way to sprawling moors, then finally to snow-dusted pines that stood against the darkening sky. Perrin had never ventured this far from the packlands before. The reality of walking willingly into a vampire's den became increasingly clear. Lord Drystan rode beside her carriage on a midnight black stallion, seemingly impervious to the cold. Finley traveled inside with Perrin, curled against her side for the first day. By the second day, he'd begun speaking in hesitant whispers. On the third day, he'd fallen asleep with his head in her lap, his small hand clutching her dress. "We're approaching the estate," Lord Drystan announced, appearing at the carriage window. "You'll see it once we crest the next hill." And then she did. The mansion sprawled across the hillside, all towering spires and sweeping archways, its windows glowing with amber light against walls of weathered stone. "It's beautiful," Perrin whispered. Lord Drystan's perfect lips curved slightly. "It can be," he said enigmatically. The carriage followed a winding path through iron gates and up to massive doors carved with raven motifs. A tall, severe-looking woman stood in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Mrs. Graves," Lord Drystan greeted her. "This is Lady Perrin. She will be taking over the children's care." The housekeeper's eyes swept over Perrin. "Very good, my lord. The children await in the east drawing room." Finley's small hand slipped into hers as they approached a set of doors. "Helen doesn't like new people," he whispered. "But don't worry, I'll protect you." The innocence of his offer, this tiny vampire child promising to protect her, nearly brought tears to her eyes. 3 children turned toward them, 2 girls and a boy, each impossibly beautiful, each regarding her with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. "Children," Lord Drystan said, "this is Lady Perrin. She will be your new governess." The oldest girl, clearly Helen, straightened in her chair, her dark curls framing a face that would have been angelic, if not for the cool disdain in her eyes. "A governess?" she asked, her voice sweet despite her sharp words. "We don't need one." The boy bounded forward, interrupting. "You're a shifter!" he exclaimed, circling Perrin with fascination. "Can you turn into a wolf right now?" "Adam!" Lord Drystan warned. "Soon," Perrin offered with a smile, "after I've had a chance to settle in." The youngest girl hung back, half hidden behind a settee. Finley tugged at Perrin's hand. "That's my sister," he whispered. "She's shy." Perrin knelt to the child's level. "Hello, Veronica," she said gently. Slowly, the little girl emerged, a porcelain doll clutched to her chest. "Do you know how to braid hair?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I'd be happy to help with your doll's hair," Perrin answered warmly. Helen scoffed. "Learn to braid your own hair, Veronica. This girl's immortal. She'll be gone before you know it." "Helen!" Lord Drystan's voice sharpened. "That's enough." "Children," he said firmly. "Lady Perrin has traveled a long way. Mrs. Graves will show her to her chambers, and tomorrow you will all demonstrate the excellent manners I know you possess." 3 reluctant nods answered him. Only Finley remained pressed against Perrin's side, his eyes now fixed on her throat with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "Finley," Lord Drystan called softly. The boy startled, then backed away. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Lord Drystan's expression softened. "We will resolve this tonight," he promised. Then, turning to Perrin, "After you've rested, there's no rush." But she caught the concern in his eyes. There was a rush, and they both knew it. A few hours later, a sharp knock came at her door. She opened it to find Lord Drystan, his features taut with concern. "My apologies for disturbing you," he said, "but there's been a development with Finley." A cold weight settled in Perrin's stomach. "What's happened?" "Mrs. Graves found him trying to enter your chambers while you were bathing." Lord Drystan's pale eyes held a gravity that sent a chill down her spine. "His hunger for your blood is growing more rapidly than I anticipated. He's become fixated." "Is he all right?" Perrin asked, instinctively stepping forward. Lord Drystan caught her arm, his touch cool through the fabric of her sleeve. "He's being watched. But either we must move forward with the blood bond now, or you must leave by morning. If we wait—" He hesitated. "I'm afraid it will be too dangerous for both you and Finley." Chapter 3. The implication hung in the air between them. Finley, sweet as he was, could become dangerous in his hunger. Perrin took a breath. She'd come here for him. But she'd been warned. Her new position came at a price, one meant to keep both her and her charges safe. "Then we should do it now," Perrin said. Lord Drystan studied her face. "You understand what this means? Once bound, the connection between us cannot be undone. You will be tied to me until one of us dies." I understood that when I agreed to come here, Perrin nodded. I won't abandon that child to suffering because I'm afraid. Very well, he said softly before entering her room. He closed the door behind them, the sound of the lock turning strangely final. Are you ready? He asked softly. Perrin was struck anew by his otherworldly beauty, golden hair gleaming in the firelight. Yes, she whispered. The bond requires a ritual, the Lord explained, moving closer, each step so graceful it seemed he floated across the floor. In vampire culture, he continued, it is comparable to a mating among your kind, though traditionally less emotional in nature. You're saying we'll be married? Perrin asked, finding it suddenly difficult to breathe. In a manner of speaking, the vampire replied, not cold but matter of fact. Does that change your decision? His blue gaze was impenetrable as Perrin considered, her pulse fluttering beneath her skin. This was more than she had expected, more intimate. No, she said finally. My decision stands. Lord Drystan nodded. Then come to me, he instructed. The command in his voice made her shiver, but not with fear. When she stood before him, close enough to feel the unnatural coolness radiating from his body, Lord Drystan reached for her hand. I need access to your throat, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The bond must be formed through a proper feeding. Perrin's heart thundered in her chest. You mean... Yes. His cool fingers brushed her collarbone, trailing up to her pulse point. I will drink directly from you. I need you to remove your shawl, he said quietly. Perrin's fingers trembled as she unwound the silk from her shoulders, letting it fall to a nearby chair. Your hair, he murmured. If you would. Understanding, Perrin pulled the pins from her dark tresses, letting them cascade over one shoulder, exposing her neck. Come closer, he said, his voice rougher than before. Perrin moved forward until they stood chest to chest. Are you afraid? He asked. Yes, she admitted, but not enough to change my mind. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then his hands were at her waist, drawing her closer. One hand slid up her back to cradle her head, angling it to expose her throat. His other arm wrapped around her waist, holding her firmly against him. She felt his lips first, cool against her heated skin, exploring the curve of her neck with feather-light touches. Her pulse jumped beneath the contact. Try to relax, he whispered gently, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. It will be easier. Perrin closed her eyes, trying to slow her racing heart. Lord Drystan's lips returned to her throat. His arms tightened around her, pulling her flush against him. Then his mouth opened against her skin, and Perrin felt the sharp press of fangs. One heartbeat of anticipation, her body tensing, and then his teeth sank into her flesh. For one terrible moment, there was only pain, sharp and insistent, her pulse pounding in her ears. Lord Drystan made a low sound against her neck. She felt him swallow, the slight movement sending another spike of pain through her. And then... warmth bloomed from the bite, radiating outward in waves that swept through her body. The pain receded, replaced by a sensation so foreign and overwhelming that Perrin couldn't suppress a startled moan. It wasn't simply pleasure. It was a liquid heat that flowed through her veins, making her limbs heavy and her mind hazy. Lord Drystan's hold shifted, one hand sliding down to her lower back, pressing her closer as he took the first deep pull of blood. The sensation of him drawing from her, the rhythmic pull and gentle suction, made her knees buckle, and she sagged against him, relying entirely on his strength to remain upright. His chest rumbled against hers, a primal, hungry sound that vibrated through both their bodies. She felt him take another swallow, stronger, more urgent, and each pull of his mouth intensified the pleasure until she was trembling in his arms. Images flashed behind her closed eyelids, fragments of memories that weren't her own. Moonlight on snow-covered mountains, children laughing in a garden she'd never seen. Were these his memories? Or hallucinations? She didn't know. All that mattered was the exquisite sensation coursing through her. Her head fell back further, offering more of herself to him, her body arching into his. Time lost meaning. There was only sensation, his mouth at her throat, the spreading warmth that made her feel both weightless and impossibly heavy. And then, abruptly, he pulled away. The sudden loss left Perrin gasping, disoriented. She swayed dangerously, and Lord Drystan's arms were the only thing keeping her upright. His eyes had darkened to midnight blue, pupils so dilated barely any color remained. "It's done, Perrin," he rasped, her name on his lips sending a shiver through her. She tried to respond, but her tongue felt too heavy. Her body felt unbearably empty without his teeth in her skin. "Please," she managed, reaching for him, though she wasn't certain what she was asking for. The world spun alarmingly. "I need to lie down," she admitted. Without hesitation, Lord Drystan swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. "It's natural to feel drowsy. The bond takes time to settle." Perrin's head lolled against his shoulder. "You smell so good," she murmured, her nose pressed against his throat. Lord Drystan's step faltered briefly. "That's the venom talking," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Venom?" she echoed, the word slurring slightly. He nodded. "When vampires feed, we release a venom that affects our prey." His eyes searched her face. "But you're a shifter. You should have been resistant." Understanding penetrated the haze in Perrin's mind. The pleasure, the euphoria, it wasn't real. Just a chemical reaction designed to make prey easier to feed upon. "I didn't think it would affect you like this," he continued, his voice strained. Lord Drystan laid her gently on the bed, arranging a blanket over her. The loss of his touch left her whimpering. "Stay," she pleaded, catching his hand. Lord Drystan closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "That's not you speaking," he said quietly. "Besides, if I fed from you again tonight—" He hesitated. "I'm not certain I could stop." "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. Lord Drystan carefully extracted his hand from hers. "You should, though," he said. As he closed the door behind him, her last coherent thought was that for the first time in 18 years, she had felt truly alive. How strange that it took a creature of death to awaken her. Chapter 4. Perrin woke to sunlight streaming through freshly opened curtains. Memory flooded back, the journey north, the children, and most vividly, Lord Drystan's mouth on her throat. Her fingers found only smooth skin. Shifter healing had erased all evidence, though a lingering warmth remained. She dressed and met with Mrs. Graves, who handed her a sealed letter from Lord Drystan. "The children await you in the nursery," the housekeeper informed her. Perrin opened her letter. "Lady Perrin, I must apologize for my absence. Urgent business calls me away until nightfall. The children will benefit from your guidance today, particularly Adam, who grows restless without activity. As for our arrangement, I assure you we need not repeat last night's complications. A simple cut will suffice to maintain our bond. Until then, consider this manor your home. Drystan." His clinical description left her with mixed feelings, relief at establishing boundaries, yet disappointment too. "You're doing it wrong," Helen declared 2 hours later, watching Perrin place the last card on their structure. "It needs to lean inward or it will collapse." From across the nursery came a crash, followed by Adam's triumphant shout. "Look how high mine is!" "Was," Veronica corrected softly. Adam laughed, gathering cards for another attempt. His energy seemed boundless, exactly as Lord Drystan had warned. Finley sat closest to Perrin, methodically building his own structure. Occasionally, his eyes would dart to her throat, then quickly away. The day passed in a pleasant blur, riding across snow-dusted fields, a formal tea, and a reading hour before the hearth. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Veronica asked, tugging at Perrin's skirt as Mrs. Graves came to collect the children. "Of course," Perrin promised. "I live here now, remember?" The little girl smiled shyly. "Good. You braid hair better than Mrs. Graves." Even Helen managed a stiff nod of farewell. Progress, exhaustion claimed her quickly that night. She had just drifted off when the subtle shift in the air woke her, a coolness that hadn't been there before. Perrin's eyes fluttered open to find pale blue eyes looking at her from across her bed. "My lord?" she whispered, sitting up. Perrin's eyes fluttered open to find pale blue eyes looking at her from across her bed. "My lord?" she whispered, sitting up. Drystan didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer to sit on the edge of her bed. "I've been waiting all day," he murmured, his voice deeper than she remembered. "Just for one taste of you." Perrin's heart thundered. You have? Something hungry flashed in his eyes as he leaned closer. Every moment away from you has been... His cool fingers traced her throat, then her collarbone. Torturous. His other hand found her thigh through the blanket, the coolness seeping through the fabric. May I? He whispered against her throat, his lips ghosting over her pulse. She nodded. His lips pressed against her skin, not biting, just exploring with feather-light kisses. That's not what I want, she finally gasped. She felt his lips curve into a smile. What do you want, my love? He asked. To feed you, she whispered. His smile widened, revealing the tips of fangs. She felt them press against her skin. Perrin jerked awake, her hands flying to her throat. The room was empty, moonlight streaming through the window. A dream? She wondered, but the lingering sensation of cool fingers on her thigh felt so real she couldn't be certain. Vampires could move silently, appearing and disappearing without trace. Could he have actually been here? She climbed out of bed, only one way to find out. The massive study door loomed before her. Perrin smoothed her hands over her skirts, trying to calm her racing heart. Before she could retreat, the door swung open. Lord Drystan stood framed in the doorway, perfect as marble. Lady Perrin, he greeted her, stepping aside. Please, enter. She moved past him, acutely aware of his presence, of the careful space he maintained between them. I trust your day with the children was pleasant? He asked. Very much so, she replied. They're remarkable, each in their own way. A hint of genuine warmth touched his features. They are indeed. Helen can be challenging, I know. She's protective of you, Perrin observed. Of all of you, really. Lord Drystan nodded thoughtfully. She was 12 when I found her. That was 4 years ago. He moved to stand by the fireplace, maintaining distance. Did Finley show any signs of distress around you? No, Perrin assured him. He seemed shy, but not fixated as before. The bond is working, then, Lord Drystan said with visible relief. An awkward silence fell between them. Perrin struggled to reconcile this polite, distant figure with the passionate one from her dream. I've been having dreams, she admitted, heat rising to her cheeks. At least, I think it was a dream. The blood bond creates a connection between us, he explained clinically. Dreams are a common side effect, particularly in the early stages. Can you see them? Perrin asked, mortification burning through her. A startled laugh escaped him. No, your thoughts remain your own, as do your dreams. Relief washed over her. Last night's feeding was more intense than necessary, Drystan stated abruptly. A small cut would provide blood without the complications that arise from a proper feeding. From his desk, he retrieved a small silver dagger. A cut on your wrist should suffice. We will also spread out the feedings, starting next week. I should be able to go on with only taking your blood once a month or so. Perrin took the blade and carefully drew it across her skin. Lord Drystan knelt before her chair, taking her wrist in cool fingers. This will be quick, he promised calmly. But the first touch of his mouth against her skin sent a shiver through her. His eyes drifted closed, dark lashes fanning against pale cheeks. A soft sound escaped him, half sigh, half moan, quiet but unmistakable. When he pulled away, his lips, stained crimson, parted on a shaky exhale he didn't need. Then, awareness returned. She watched him reassemble his careful mask, eyes cooling, lips pressing together, shoulders straightening as he rose. Thank you, he said formally. That should be sufficient. Perrin nodded, unable to speak. The cut was already healing, yet the impression of his mouth lingered. Tomorrow night, then? She asked weakly. Lord Drystan retreated to his desk. No, we should repeat this every 3 days, he said, back turned as though he couldn't trust himself to look at her. Perrin left quietly, more confused than when she'd first come in. Chapter 5. Autumn's crimson leaves gave way to winter's snow, and eventually winter softened into spring. Through it all, Perrin found herself caught in a dance of longing and restraint, her days filled with the children, her nights consumed by thoughts of their guardian. Helen now sought her out for evening walks. Adam's energy found focus under her guidance. Veronica's drawings revealed a soul blossoming, while Finley looked at her with pure adoration. But these victories paled against the exquisite torture of Lord Drystan's presence. Every fortnight, their ritual unfolded in his study, the silver dagger catching firelight, the precise cut across her wrist, the breathless anticipation as he knelt before her, taking her hand in his cool grip. Despite how his lips lingered longer against her skin, despite the hunger she glimpsed after feeding, he maintained his careful distance. Her dreams grew more vivid each night. Dreams of cool hands mapping constellations across her heated skin, of fangs pressing crescents into her flesh, of pleasure bordering on pain. She would wake gasping, sometimes catching his scent in her room, as if he had stood watching over her sleep. January brought a blizzard that imprisoned them all within the mansion's walls. Forced proximity heightened the tension. Twice she collided with his solid chest rounding corners, his hands instinctively steadying her before he stepped away with a muttered apology. "He watches you even when he's not in the room," Helen observed one afternoon. "The portraits. Haven't you noticed? Their eyes follow you like his do." Perrin had noticed. She sometimes felt the weight of centuries watching her through painted eyes. By April, his composure crumbled visibly with each taste of her blood. Once, his tongue had traced the cut before he drank, a caress so intimate she'd gasped aloud. She learned his story in fragments, piecing together the lonely centuries of his existence, how he had found purpose in rescuing vampire children. "He thinks he's cursed," Adam said once. "He told me that immortality isn't a gift, it's a punishment." By May, this careful dance of approach and retreat had stretched Perrin's nerves to breaking. Until one night, 5 months after her arrival, when everything changed. Lord Drystan stood by the window, his back to her, silhouette outlined by moonlight. "The children asked about going to the village festival next week," she said. "It wouldn't be wise," he replied. "They become excited in crowds." "They're doing better," Perrin observed. "They just want to feel normal sometimes." He turned then, moonlight casting half his face in shadow. "They aren't normal, Perrin," he declared. "They never will be." "Neither are you," she said softly. "Neither am I. Yet we find ways to live." "You should make the cut," he said, changing the subject. Perrin looked down at the dagger. "No," she said, setting it aside. He went perfectly still. Rising from her chair, Perrin moved toward him. "I'm tired of feeling your gaze on me when you think I won't notice. I'm tired of dreams that leave me aching for your touch. I've watched you fight yourself for 5 months, she said, stopping before him. Bite me again, she whispered, tilting her head to expose the column of her throat. Drystan's eyes darkened, fixed on the pulse fluttering beneath her skin. Perrin, he rasped, her name a warning. His hands hovered at her shoulders, trembling with restraint. You deserve more than a half-life with a creature outside time, he said. You deserve a mate who can give you a future. I can't bear children, she murmured, moving beside him. And I've already lived half a life, 18 years of emptiness. I don't fear your immortality, Drystan. I fear never belonging again. Not to anyone. Not to you. Something fractured in his expression. His fingers brushed her skin, cool, reverent, then possessive. If I start, he whispered, I may not stop. Then don't. His lips claimed hers in a kiss that stole her breath, hungry, desperate, centuries of longing igniting between them. His mouth was cool, yet fire bloomed where he touched her. Without a word, he lifted her and carried her through a hidden passage into his chambers, where firelight danced across dark velvet and shadows. For one suspended moment, he studied her face, searching for doubt. Finding none, he lowered his head to her throat. Last chance, he murmured. Perrin tilted her neck in silent offering. His arms tightened, fangs pressing lightly before piercing deep. She gasped as sharp pain melted into spreading warmth, liquid fire that flooded her veins. The world spun. Every heartbeat thundered between them, her body trembling as the bond snapped open, raw and radiant. He drank, a low growl vibrating against her skin. Visions flashed, moonlight, laughter, centuries of memory not her own. When he finally withdrew, his kiss was fevered, tasting of blood and devotion. The metallic tang only deepened the intimacy, their essences mingling in something sacred and forbidden. Drystan laid her on the bed, unfastening her gown until she lay bathed in firelight and moonlight. His cool hands traced her heated skin, every touch magnified by the venom still coursing through her. "Perrin," he breathed, "my love." When he entered her, it was as if the world ceased to exist. Pleasure and hunger, ice and fire, two halves made whole. The bite's venom heightened every sensation until she was dissolving into him, body and soul. She had never felt so alive. The emptiness of years vanished as if it had never been. Afterward, wrapped in midnight sheets, his cool body against her warmth, Perrin felt reborn. "I've lived for centuries," he murmured, "and never felt anything like this." Perrin kissed his palm, nestling beneath his chin as dawn's first gold touched the towers outside. Chapter 6. Spring blossomed into a golden summer, the estate transformed by more than just the changing seasons. Laughter echoed through once silent corridors. Flowers adorned tables that had known only dust. Perrin found herself living a happiness she had never dared imagine possible. "I never thought I'd have this again," she admitted one balmy June evening as she and Drystan lay entwined in his massive bed. "Have what?" Drystan asked, his cool fingers tracing idle patterns along her bare shoulder. "Family." His smile, once so rare, now increasingly frequent, brightened his perfect features. He reached out to steal a bite from Perrin's plate with playful grace. "I'd forgotten how delicious blackberries could be," he remarked, and the simple pleasure on his face made her heart swell. It made him seem more human, the fact that he didn't need to eat, but felt the desire anyway, like he was opening up to life again. But then, during a midsummer feast, celebrating Adam's hunting success, Drystan accepted glass after glass of wine until faint flush colored his normally pale cheeks. The more he drank, the more freely his laughter came. "Are you drunk?" she whispered in delighted disbelief as they retired to their chambers. "Of course not," he snorted. "Alcohol cannot affect us." Yet he was undeniably tipsy, his kisses more unrestrained than usual, his eternally formal speech slightly less composed. Perrin found it utterly charming, though a small voice wondered how wine could affect him at all. A few weeks later, she woke to find Drystan still beside her, not reading or watching over her as was his habit, but simply sleeping. When she touched his shoulder gently, his eyes flew open with a start, momentary confusion giving way to recognition. "Good morning," he murmured, sitting up quickly. "I must have been lost in thought." "Lost in dreams, more like?" Perrin teased, though unease stirred in her chest. Drystan dismissed it with a laugh, pulling her down for a kiss that soon made her forget her concerns. Yet the incidents continued. During an evening game of chess with Adam, Drystan's head nodded forward, his eyes drifting shut mid-move. Their feeding ritual had evolved since those first formal encounters. Now, when he drank from her, it was part of their lovemaking. Intimate, passionate, often leaving them both breathless with pleasure. Yet recently, she'd noticed he took less each time, sometimes barely more than a few swallows. "Don't you need more?" she asked one night in early September. "This is sufficient," he replied, already moving to kiss her neck, clearly intent on distracting her. The deflection might have worked if she hadn't caught him rubbing his temples when he thought she wasn't looking, hadn't seen the brief wince when the children's play grew too loud. Something was changing in him, something neither of them understood. By October, he began to miscalculate his own strength. Once, while demonstrating proper form to Adam, his grip on the practice sword slipped, the wooden blade clattering to the floor. That night, after the children were asleep, Perrin found Drystan in his study staring into the fire. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Something's wrong. You're falling asleep during the day. You dropped your sword. You froze at dinner tonight." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep within him, he met her gaze. "I'm over 500 years old. Perhaps this is simply what happens to vampires of a certain age." But his explanation rang false, and they both knew it. "When did it start?" Perrin asked, though she already suspected the answer. His gaze met hers reluctantly. "Around the time we began sharing blood more intimately." The implication hung in the air between them. "You need to feed," she said decisively, already rolling up her sleeve. "Properly. Not these small sips you've been taking." In the weeks that followed, Perrin devoted herself to research, seeking any information on vampire shifter bonds. A few texts mentioned a vampire's ability to form blood bonds with multiple humans, creating what one ancient volume called a harem of sustenance to ensure adequate feeding without killing. But none addressed what might happen when a vampire fed exclusively from a shifter for extended periods. Meanwhile, Drystan's condition deteriorated. On a bitter November evening, disaster struck during Helen's celebration when Drystan collapsed mid-toast. For 3 days, the fever raged. Perrin barely left Drystan's side, watching in growing terror as he thrashed in delirium, calling out in languages she didn't recognize. On the 4th morning, Perrin woke from a fitful doze in the bedside chair to find Drystan watching her, his eyes clear again. "You look tired," he murmured, his voice hoarse. A startled laugh escaped her. "That's what you have to say after nearly dying?" "Dying?" He frowned, trying to push himself upright. The effort clearly cost him. His arms trembled visibly. "That's a little dramatic, wouldn't you say?" Perrin rolled her eyes. "My blood is doing this to you," she said finally. "Something in shifter blood is poisoning you." "We don't know that," Drystan countered. "What else could it be?" she demanded. "The changes started after we bonded. You've been growing weaker for months, and now this fever." She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought that she might be slowly killing the man she loved. Drystan reached for her hand, his grip weaker than she'd ever felt it. "There might be a solution," she said hesitantly. "The texts I found, they mentioned vampires can form blood bonds with multiple humans. If you took another partner, fed from someone else—" "No," his response was immediate. "Never. Drystan, if my blood is poisoning you—" "You are my wife," he interrupted, "the mother of my children. I won't betray what we have. I couldn't." "But you're dying," she whispered, the tears finally spilling over. "I'm not," he countered, pulling her into his arms, still warm with the remnants of fever. Tears welled in her eyes. His nobility would be the death of him. That night, when Drystan had fallen into deep slumber, Perrin sat beside the bed watching the rise and fall of his chest. The decision crystallized in her mind, painful but necessary. She would not watch him fade away, would not let the children lose the only father they had known. With trembling hands, she penned 3 letters by candlelight. Then, with only a small travel bag containing essentials, Perrin slipped from the mansion into the bitter November night. Chapter 7. Perrin walked for an entire day, moving through the snow like a ghost. By nightfall, she reached a small village nestled in the valley beyond the forest. Lights glowed in cottage windows, smoke curled from chimneys. As she approached, a scent caught her attention, familiar yet unexpected. Another shifter. The woman stood in the doorway, watching Perrin with obvious curiosity. Something in her posture, the way she balanced her weight, the slight tilt of her head, marked her as wolf. "You're a long way from any packlands, sister," the woman called. Perrin hesitated. "I'm just passing through," she replied, her voice hoarse. The older woman studied her for a long moment. "No, you're not," she said flatly. "You're running." Before Perrin could respond, the woman stepped forward. "I'm Vara. I have rooms above the blacksmith shop. You'll stay with me tonight." Vara prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and stew. "Now," she said once Perrin had eaten, "tell me what brings a lone wolf here in winter." Perrin found herself telling Vara everything: the blood bond, the children, their happiness, and Drystan's mysterious decline. "Let me understand," Vara said slowly. "He has to create a connection with someone else that rivals what he shares with you?" Put so bluntly, it sounded awful. "Yes," Perrin said miserably. "I suppose we could share him." "So your husband has to cheat on you or he'll die?" Vara's eyebrows shot toward her hairline. "Essentially, yes." The older woman shook her head. "Well, never marry a vampire, I'll tell you that much. Too complicated by half." She rose, collecting their empty plates. "Get some sleep. Things often look clearer in the morning." Perrin collapsed into the guest bed, surrendering to dreamless sleep. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight. She had just managed to dress when she heard voices from the main room. Vara's low contralto, and a male voice that stopped her heart mid-beat. Drystan. Impossible though it seemed, she would know that voice anywhere. The precise diction, the subtle musicality that centuries hadn't erased. But how? She'd left no trail, had walked for an entire day, had told no one where she was going. Moving silently to the door, she pressed her ear against the wood, straining to catch their conversation. "Any travelers come through recently?" Drystan was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "A woman, dark-haired, traveling alone." "Plenty of women in these parts," Vara replied noncommittally. "Can't say I've noticed any particular one." "Please," Drystan's voice dropped, raw with desperation. "She's my wife. Our children are distraught. If you've seen her or heard anything..." Perrin couldn't bear it any longer. She pushed open the door and stepped into the main room. Drystan stood by the window, his back to her. Even from behind, she could see the tension in his shoulders. At the sound of the door, he turned, and the naked hope that blazed across his features stole her breath. "Perrin," he whispered. They moved simultaneously, closing the distance between them. His arms came around her with surprising strength, crushing her against his chest. She clung to him just as fiercely. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I would find you anywhere," he said simply. She pulled back to see his face. "You shouldn't have come. You're still weak." "I'm stronger than you think," he interrupted. "Come home, Perrin. The children need you. I need you." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I can't. You're dying, and you won't listen to reason. My blood is killing you." "Wait," Vara interrupted. "That's your husband? I thought you said he was a vampire." "He is," Perrin confirmed. Vara circled Drystan slowly. "He looks human," she said bluntly. "He smells human. He's a human. No doubt about that." "I assure you, madam, I am a vampire," Drystan said with dignified offense. "Well, you're not one now," Vara stated. "He's been ill," Perrin protested. "Growing weaker, falling asleep when vampires don't need sleep." "I've met vampires," Vara shrugged. "They smell like overripe fruit and death. You smell like a normal human male." Drystan suddenly swayed on his feet, and Perrin guided him to a chair by the fire. "When did you last eat?" Vara asked him. "Vampires don't require food," Drystan replied, blinking confusedly. "Well, humans do." Vara disappeared into her kitchen, returning with a plate piled high with bread, meat, and cheese. "You look half-starved. Eat." To Perrin's astonishment, Drystan stared at the food with unmistakable hunger. After a moment's hesitation, he took a piece of bread, then a slice of meat. By the third bite, he was eating with genuine enthusiasm, his expression shifting from confusion to relief, color returning to his face. "I don't understand," Perrin said. "How is this possible?" "It's simple," Vara said. "He's human now. Humans need food." "But he was a vampire," Perrin insisted. "He drank my blood for months." "Shifter blood," Vara interrupted. "We heal fast. Perhaps it healed him?" Drystan set down his fork. "Are you suggesting that Perrin's blood has cured my vampirism?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Vara replied. "I'm telling you what my nose tells me. You were a vampire. Now you're not." "But that's impossible," Perrin whispered, though the evidence sat before her. Drystan, with color in his cheeks, hunger for real food, and a fundamentally changed scent. "Apparently not," Vara shrugged. "Now, are you two going back to your children, or do you plan to stand in my kitchen gawking all day?" Drystan reached for Perrin's hand, his fingers truly warm with the heat of humanity. "The children," he said suddenly, his eyes meeting Perrin's. "If shifter blood can reverse vampirism..." "With my help, they could grow up," Perrin breathed. "Age naturally again." Vara gave them a pointed look. "First things first. You need sleep," she pointed at Drystan. She showed them to her guest room. "Sort out the rest when you're thinking straight." The door had barely closed when Drystan gathered Perrin into his arms. They fell onto the narrow bed, too exhausted for anything but the desperate need to hold each other. "Don't ever leave me again," Drystan murmured against her hair. "I couldn't bear it." "Never," Perrin promised. "I'm sorry." As sleep claimed them both, Perrin's last conscious thought was of the 4 children waiting at home. Children who might now have a chance at the normal lives that had been stolen from them, all because of a bond formed in desperation that had become the greatest gift imaginable. Epilogue. 3 years had passed since the winter day when Perrin and Drystan discovered the miraculous truth that shifter blood, far from killing vampires, could restore their humanity. Perrin sat on a stone bench in the garden, watching as Drystan demonstrated proper sword technique to Adam. The morning sun caught in his golden hair, now streaked with the faintest hints of silver at the temples, a badge of his regained humanity that he wore with quiet pride. "Father's getting slower," Helen observed, settling onto the bench beside Perrin. At 14, she was in the midst of the transformation herself, still immortal, but gradually changing as Perrin's blood worked its magic. "Don't let him hear you say that," Perrin replied with a smile, though they both knew Drystan would simply laugh at the observation. Across the garden, Veronica and Finley played an elaborate game of their own devising, still perfectly immortal, their movements carrying the fluid grace unique to vampires. The process would be slow. Perrin could only safely feed one vampire at a time, and at Helen's insistence, she had been the first. As the eldest, she had lived longest in her frozen state, had felt most keenly the curse of a mind that continued to mature while her body remained childish. "When will it be my turn?" Adam asked often, watching with barely concealed impatience as Helen grew a fraction of an inch taller, as her features subtly matured. "Soon," was always the answer. Once Helen completed her transformation, Adam would be next, then Veronica, and finally Finley. It would take years, perhaps a decade or more, but they had something they'd never possessed before: hope. "Perrin," Drystan called, shading his eyes against the sun as he looked toward her. "Would you mind showing Adam that disarming move you taught Helen?" "Of course," she replied, rising from the bench. As she crossed the garden, her hand brushed unconsciously over her still flat stomach, where their newest family member grew, a miracle they had never imagined possible. That night, after the children were asleep, Perrin and Drystan stood on the balcony of their chambers, watching the moon rise over the northern forests. His arm circled her waist, drawing her close against the evening chill, another human sensation he had relearned to appreciate. "Are you ever sorry?" Perrin asked quietly. "About losing your immortality?" Drystan considered the question with thoughtfulness. "Eternity is worthless without meaning, without love," he said finally. His hand drifted to rest over hers where it cradled their unborn child. "I would rather live one mortal lifetime with you, with our family, than an endless existence alone." Perrin leaned into his embrace, savoring the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "We'll grow old together," she murmured. Not a question, but a promise. "Yes," Drystan agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And watch our children grow alongside us, all of them in time." As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Perrin thought of the long, improbable path that had brought them here, from a chance encounter at a mating ceremony, to a desperate blood bond, to this unexpected joy. Once, they had been defined by what they'd lost: her fertility, his humanity, the children's futures. Now, beneath the vast night sky, they stood together not as broken pieces, but as a whole. What had begun as necessity had transformed into the greatest gift: a family forged not by blood or fate, but by the choice to love despite all odds. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this story. It had a bit more gothic romance than usual. I guess the Halloween atmosphere got to me. Tell me in the comments if you liked it, and if you'd like to hear more in that style. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next story.